Okay.
We have half a minute before we start.
We do have half a minute before. Yeah. I am preoccupied with totally different thing right now. Collective memory, institutional memory versus personal memory. And how do you make this claim? How do you reach the balance in the 21st century? I don't know. I mean, that was my question, but I mean.
So you have wonderful questions after Nava Semel's session.
Okay. Thank you.
Erga, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, please give me 5 minutes more. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
5 minutes.
There is no problem because you are the speaker, the chairperson in the session after. And there is no, if I remember good, well,
Okay. Yeah.
we have a short break. We can manage.
Okay, thank you so much.
So we'll start.
Shalom, Naama.
Shalom. Shalom, everyone.
מה נשמע?
מצוין.
בסדר.
So, good evening, everybody. This session is dedicated to Nava Semel's and the Rat Laughed, צחוק שלך בראש. I have a personal connection, I had a personal connection with Nava. I knew Nava Semel in person. The first time I met Nava, I was 26. I was so lucky to meet her, and it was an immediate connection. The wonderful writers, Shlomo Artzi's sister is a famous singer in Israel. Nava Semel is the director of the Teatron Kameri, is Nava Semel's wife, and Yitzhak Artzi's daughter. So you maybe ask yourself, who is Yitzhak Artzi? He was a Shoah survivor that I was so impressed by when I was in elementary school, I think in the 4th grade. So I couldn't believe that Nava Semel and I become friends. How is it possible that the two of us are just talking? We talked in our first meeting. It was it just happened. We talked for hours. And the last time I met Nava, it was in December 2016 in Jerusalem. And none of us were from Jerusalem. Both of us passed our childhood in the north of Tel Aviv. We were almost neighbors. But of course, Nava was 14 years older than me. In that meeting in Jerusalem, Nava told me that her doctor just called her and she had to cut our meeting and leave immediately, but she would meet me in Tel Aviv soon. We never met again. Nava got cancer, and that's why her doctor called her. She died too young, but her impressive body of works is left for us forever as immortal privilege of the artists. In this session, we have 2 papers. The first is by Dr. Naama Reshef, and the second by Professor Sławomir Żurek. The first paper is Where the Little Girl, What Little Girl, Was There Ever a Little Girl? On transgenerational emotional memory of trauma in Nava Semel's and the Rat Laughed by Dr. Reshef. Dr. Naama Reshef is a colleague of mine at Kaye College, College of Education. She received her PhD in philosophy from Bar-Ilan University. Currently, she is the head of the literature department, the same department I headed some years ago. Her current research project focuses on memory and post-memory of trauma in literary text. Her article From Narrative Memory to Emotional Memory, Nava Semel's book, and The Rat Laughed, was accepted for publication in a book on the subject of post-memory, and it is to be published by Routledge. Naama, please, the virtual floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Erga, and thank you for inviting me to speak. When I first read Nava Semel's book, And the Rat Laughed, which was published in 2001, what was especially noticeable to me was the fact that, unlike most conventional Holocaust literature, the focus of interest in Semel's book is not on the events that happened during the Holocaust to the little girl who became the old woman, but rather on the memory of the events and the evolution of that memory over decades and centuries. And that was something very new to me. I never read anything like that before. Nava Semel is known to be one of the first to write about the influences of the Holocaust trauma on the memories of the second and third generation. But in this book, she put special emphasis on the practice of memory itself. I think the main argument in this book regarding memory is that the narrative memory, the factual, integrative, coherent memory does not have the power to carry the burden of remembrance. And many times it becomes silent memory, a memory that cannot be said in words. The traumatic story is then encoded beneath the threshold of consciousness in a psychological crypt that suppresses the story, but which simultaneously preserves it with its vitality and its emotional power that consumes the self from within. However, Semel presents an alternative to the narrative memory, the emotional memory, a memory which is beyond the facts and the events themselves. She points out to the vulnerability of this memory and anticipates the dangers lurking in memory in what she calls elsewhere the tunnels of time, and especially in digital spaces where the accessibility and availability, the rapid replication, the widespread distribution, commercialization, and interactivity may lead to the memory's evolution and transfiguration up to its utter distortion, which we see in the book. And yet only the emotional memory can withstand the ravages of time and technology and bear the remembrance. So to understand Nava Semel's concept of memory, as I've outlined very briefly, I want to start from the beginning. The story of And the Rat Laughed begins with an attempt of an old woman, as she's called throughout the book, to tell her granddaughter of her experiences during the Shoah. And there are various reasons that prevent her from laying her memory bare in a form of a coherent narrative. The fear of reliving the past and the feelings of terror and pain that accompany the story, the fear of being criticized by those around her, and the fear of the toxic story's impact on her close family. There's also the old woman's concern that the listeners, and indeed even she herself, would distort and misinterpret the original trauma. But above all, the old woman finds it impossible to condense the original traumatic memory and experience that transcends the bonds of imagination and understanding into a template of words, into the recognized language and accepted representation. This is, for example, how she tries to convey to her granddaughter what darkness was for her. Let me share my presentation. Darkness. The colored highlights are mine, of course. Darkness. This is where the story reaches an impasse. The old woman is finding it difficult to explain darkness to someone for whom it has an obvious meaning, part of the day and night cycle. At this point in her storyline, she's inclined to give up trying. Her darkness is not about a lack of light, nor even a contrast with light. It's a subconscious substance that has mass and weight and has managed to defy the laws of nature and work its way through every barrier in the human body. Her darkness would not lend itself to reformulation. The grandmother eventually tells something to her granddaughter, but rather than telling the entire lucid story, succeeds only in conveying hazy fragments, a shell of the story. A girl, father, mother, a pit, darkness, a rat, and a figure called Stefan. The narrative story fails. The dry factual events of the traumatic experience cannot be conveyed to the next generation, and it seems as if the memory has been buried forever. But then, moments before the granddaughter leaves, the old woman, seemingly in a flash of eternal intuition, asks to tell her a fictional story, a legend. She tells the tale of the rat who wanted to laugh. Immediately afterwards, when leaving the apartment building, the granddaughter experiences something very strange. My legs run up the stairs. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know why myself, but I shut my eyes. I went up in the dark, and it was my own darkness. I could taste it, chew it even. That darkness got stuck between my teeth, in my throat, in my stomach, between my legs. What is happening here? What is this darkness that the granddaughter is describing? This is not the last time that we encounter the darkness. Later in the story, 10 years after that meeting, an unidentified woman sends an email to a friend in which she describes what happened to her after discovering a website called ילדה-and-עכברוש.com, girl-and-a-rat.com. The site features a series of shocking poems, the author and time of composition of which are unclear. The poems portray hazy fragments depicting a girl, father, mother, rat, and Stefan. The woman describes what happened after she read the poem. I turned off the PC. I even unplugged it and lay there in the dark. Suddenly, it seemed as if the words were actually appearing on my body, like a luminescent tattoo. The nausea didn't stop until daybreak. And I didn't even mean to. I mean, it isn't mine, and suddenly it is. Without meaning to, I saw my own world decompose into the most basic concepts, and I'm a little girl and a rat too. The darkness appeared yet again 100 years after the meeting between the old woman and her granddaughter. Waimi Prana is a researcher at the Anthropological Institute who is drawn to study a popular myth about a girl and a rat that gave rise to varying forms of culture, text, comics, video games, performances, visual imagery, religious rituals, and others. Waimi, like all of humankind in this futuristic era, does not operate or communicate in the physical world, but rather in a virtual realm via a chip implanted in her brain. However, when she seeks to identify the origin of the myth about a girl and a rat, she detaches herself from the virtual world. And this is what happens to her. I hear a scream somewhere deep inside me, not from any recognizable part of myself. The little girl who once was existed, the pit that once was existed, darkness, nothing more. I turn off my input chip and let my brain take over. I, the dark, tell someone that the little girl I never had a mother or a, and she continues, from the deepest folds of the body, rising upwards, there in the dark, someone is laughing. So we have three women, 3 points in time, and a darkness that connects them to the young girl's traumatic story. These are 3 points on a Semel template, the real erase of remembrance, all without the lucid, factual, narrative, traumatic story being told even once to one of those who remember it. Nevertheless, it is clear that these women have some sort of memory that caused them to sense even a sliver of what was the darkness for that old woman, that caused them to connect with the source of the traumatic memory and to feel something of it. Although not conveyed in verbal form, we can learn something about the force of this memory from the past to those who are bearing it from their uncanny feelings. According to Freud, the uncanny is not really something new or foreign, but rather something which is familiar and all established in the mind and which become alienated from it only through the process of repression. Indeed, all women experience similar feelings: foreignness, fear, discomfort, anxiety, at the core of which flutter feelings of intimacy, familiarity, and hominess. It was my own darkness, says the granddaughter. It isn't mine, and suddenly it is, says the website revealer. I hear a scream somewhere deep inside me. Maybe I am her, says the researcher. What then is this non-narrative memory that passed between its bearers and which generated the uncanny feeling? How did it pass? This is what Nava Semel writes of the old woman. She's gotten used to not being able to remember the words. Darkness was what she could feel. Semel posits the emotional memory against the silent narrative memory. The emotional memory preserves an emotional extract of the original trauma, passing under the threshold of the consciousness of the sender and the recipient in whom it beats as a living heartbeat. Semel signals the aesthetic fictional realm and the poetic language as the one enabling the transfer of the emotional memory. When the silent memory is processed into a fictional story, song, myth, or other fictional work, it may succeed in making its presence felt as an emotional memory, in raising a voice. Art, Art, says Semel in one of her interviews, is the arena of exactly the same things to which we cannot impart physicalness, actuality, fear, horror, hunger. Hunger is a feeling. In the arena of art and the individual's destiny, even if fabricated, I can allow him to undergo these experiences and through them to believe that a future reader, that it will happen to him. The memory will be generated within him. So now we must ask ourselves, how does an aesthetic fictional work and the poetic language enable the silent memory's transformation into an emotional memory? In Semel's book, the emotions attached to the traumatic experience are not purely a conscious entity. Emotion possesses a physical essence that is engraved into the body, is branded into the flesh. It sticks between the teeth, in the throat, between your legs. It blazes visually on the flesh like a tattoo. It pervades the blood, every cell and neuron. For those bearing a memory and the feelings inherent in it, it is always accompanied by strong physical sensations such as nausea and vomiting. Even when the researcher Wilhelm described her quest in search of the memory, it is connected to the body. She's saying, if I write to you in my own handwriting, will you read it? A page with words on it, stained with the involuntary dripping of the body, perspiration, saliva, urine, blood, tears. Psychoanalyst and literary scholar Julia Kristeva identified the bodily sensory dimension as belonging to a pre-verbal semiotic realm, in which a child experiences the bond with its mother via raw sensory impression, bodily composition, sensual feelings, rhythms, and tones. The semiotic physical sensory realm is not identified by formal, organized, and symbolic language, is not subject to its rules, and cannot be expressed by it. The semiotic realm also encompasses the vivid physical, emotional impressions at the heart of the traumatic experience. Their existence in the pre-verbal semiotic realm precludes them from being coherently formulated via the organized grammatical and linguistical structure of symbolic language. In what of poetic language? How does it enable the expression of the semiotic physical emotional experiences? Pre-verbal semiotic communication does not disappear when a baby begins to communicate via its mother, via symbolic language, but rather takes a backseat to symbolic language, retreats to the unconscious. In order to reveal the presence of the semiotic behind the symbolic and to give voice to the physical, emotional impressions, we must use language in a way that will dismantle the organized, arranged, and disciplinary structure of the symbolic language and return us to free verbal ways of thinking. Poetic language achieves this in several different ways, which I will briefly demonstrate via the lyric fragments in the 3rd chapter of Semel's book. This corpus of poems in the 3rd chapter contains violent and harsh texts whose origin is unknown, that are home to the characters we recognize from the old woman's fragmented story. The poetic language uses an entire poetic lexicon to resist the symbolic language, the very words and sentences in which it is itself composed, thereby exposing the semiotic realm. For example, ideas from one semantic field are used to describe experiences and feelings from an entirely different one, driving a wedge between markers and their indicated terms, like in the poem called Warm. I'll never be cold, for dirt is my blanket. I'll always be warm, for I'll cover with blood. The expectation created by the use of markers that are familiar to us from the semantic field of warmth and safety is shattered in the face of the unusual pairing with dirt and blood, taken from the semantic fields of death and war. In the poem A Hug, where the title indicates a gesture of love and affection, the marker is shattered later in the poem. The lies are free to ruin the place. I lay there, and felt them tug on my face, on my body. For me, that's a hug. There's also a transgressive gap between the poem's linguistic register, childish, naive, and innocent tone, and their shocking and sinister content that does not allow the reader to accept them at face value. For example, in the poem Colors, green is what comes out of your mouth, red is what comes out of your legs, brown is what comes out from behind, black is light. Or in the poem Easy, it's easy to get rid of a child who is small. With a rat, it's not so easy at all. Another way in which poetic language enables the semiotic to penetrate the symbolic is by exposing the language materialistic and formative aspects and the game in which it engages with them. Examples of this includes the use of oxymorons, contrast, metaphors, and metonymies, such as in the sentences, black is light, my body makes rain, a whole child is running out of steam. The text features numerous repetitions, anaphors, and epistrophes that emphasizes the symbolic language artificiality, such as in the poem A Riddle, where's the little girl? What little girl? Was there ever a little girl? And the poem A Name, a little girl without a name, a place without a name, people without a name. The compressed repetitiveness also sustains rhythm and musicality, which are some of the signs of the semiotic realm. The process of breaking down the marking of the represented idea is also expressed in the poem's frantic transition between subject and object. The narrators leap from her viewpoint of being present, like in the poem Hide and Seek. Hide and seek, just count to 10. No one will find me ever again. To the concealed external and impersonal words. For example, in the poem Addition Subtraction, little girl lives beneath the ground. The transition undermines the language ability to grasp the character and set it within agreed upon markers. Semel also uses different allusions to children's songs, stories, and games, which he embeds in the poems in a way that flips their original meaning, presenting them in a threatening and disturbing light. The poem Lullaby, for example, opens with words from a magical legend. Once upon a time, there was a little Jewish girl, and she had little Jewish hands, but it's quickly twisted into a nightmarish poem, and a little Jewish body and a big hole. The poem Catch seemingly describes the familiar game, but its content reveals a horrific reality. If I run away, he gets even more wild. That's the game that we play, just the fun, the child. The refusal to be written within the framework of the accepted marking convention and the act of revealing the accepted manners of representation instill the poetic language with an element of subversion and position it as a liminal language, which undermines and cracks the boundaries of symbolic language, thereby exposing the semiotic realm in which the trauma is seared in such a primal, physical, sensory, and pre-verbal manner. Without meaning to, I saw my own world decompose into the most basic concepts, says the character who revealed the lyric fragments in Semel's book. Indeed, the poetic language succeeded in destroying the deceptive, unified texture of the formal language, to dismantle its fundamental concepts, and now, as quote, the inwards pour out. The traumatic physical emotional experience can waste its voice. At this point, I want to turn to Semel's remark about her own work in one of her interviews. She says, in the novel And the Rat Laughed, the protagonist called herself the carrier of memory. Like me, she set out in search of the emotional memory, the one beyond facts and events, out of a belief, naive perhaps, that the work of art has the power to pass it on to those who come after us. Semel indicates that her own work also intends to convey an emotional memory. And indeed, poetic characteristic which breaks the symbolic language and accepted literary convention can be found in the way she wrote the book. Each chapter in the book is written in a different literary genre, as you probably noticed: story, legend, poetry, science fiction, and dialogue, forcing the reader to juggle between them as he breaks down his emotional and cognitive expectations that are rebuilt in each chapter. The rapid transition between different conceptual and formal patterns, the essence of which is the representation of reality according to defined and agreed rules, disrupt the internal order of which a genre system is built and expose the artificiality of the various means of representation of the literary text. The transition between genres also breaks the reader's reading sequence, and disrupts the way the text communicates with the reader. Semel's decision to skip time between different parts of the book, and especially the mixing of time in the first chapter, in which the old woman tries to tell her story, adds another layer to the fragmentary technique she employs. The consciousness of time that exists in the first chapter is, in Lawrence Langer's language, durational time, a consciousness that opposes any chronology that determines some form of finite understanding. In choosing to oppose the linear line dictated by the very act of writing in words and sentences, the text undermines the fertile attempt to tell history in an orderly and reasoned manner, and reflects the same disorder through which the semiotic world is revealed. Even Semel's decision not to recognize by name some of the main figures in the story, the old woman, the granddaughter, the website revealer, not only places them as representative characters rather than concrete subjects, but also works against the symbolic dimension of the language whose essence is identification and naming. So the entire book, form and content, testifies to Semel's perception of the possibility and importance of transferring emotional memory through the creation of art. However, it is interesting to see that in her book, she does not go all the way with this perception. In the fourth chapter, the futuristic researcher, Y. Prana, embarks on a journey following the myth of a girl and a rat. It is my duty to discover the encrypted truth within this myth, she said. And indeed, on her journey, Wynie encounters a revelation. The hidden diary of Reverend Stanislav, who cared for the young girl towards the end of the war. The diary is detailed in the chapter that seals the book and sheds light on the factual events. Wynie, and indeed even Semel herself, feel the need to fill the gap left in the story and to mend the pieces of information. They show a narratological instinct, an aspiration to understand the story in an integrative and coherent way and to give it a literal meaning. This part of Semel's book corresponds with the deep structure that Iris Milner finds in second-generation literature, the awareness of the very existence of the absent, and the activation of the narrative instinct that strives to fill the gap. I cracked the riddle, says Wynie. She has completed the puzzle that the myth posed to her, and now she can tell and write the complete history. I think Semel can be criticized for her decision to end the book with this narrative redemption. The transition in the last chapter from emotional memory back to narrative memory is precisely the transition of what the French historian Pierre Nora calls from memory to history. From the spontaneous living memory to the rigid, critical, and material history. History is perpetually suspicious of memory, said Nora, and its true mission is to suppress and destroy it. Exposing the diary, completing the factual details, and weaving the narrative memory dims the living inner experience of the emotional memory action, which now, with the discovery of the diary, rests on the written text as prosthetic memory, which according to Nora, captures us and is no longer ours. The priest's diary is an archival item that contains memory in a fossilized and material manner that produces historical distance. The incarnation of memory in matter belongs to the district of unity of mind without unity of feeling, in Nora's words. And this is exactly what Semel, who sought to place a living alternative to the silent memory, feared of. That being said, Semel's failure to exhaust the concept of emotional memory to the very end does not impair, in my opinion, the heart of Semel's work in this book, in outlining the features of emotional memory in the artistic realm within which it exists. Semel succeeds in her unique attempt to enable the silent memory of the survivors to raise a voice that will be passed on to future generations and will not be forgotten. And in the words of the priest that fill the book, against all forgetfulness, this memory shall prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Naama. It was very interesting. All the questions we'll ask later after our second speaker. Our next speaker, second speaker, is Professor Sławomir Żurek. His paper is called The Jewish Child in Polish Hiding Place, Children, Adults, and Animals in And the Rat Laughed by Nava Semel and God's Horse by Wilhelm Dichter. Professor Żurek is, of course, our leader in this project, but he is the head of the Polish Jewish Literature Studies Center and the director of the International Center for Research of the History and Cultural Heritage of the Central and Eastern Europe Jews at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin. Professor Żurek, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Erga. I hope that everybody can see my presentation and can hear me. It's okay?
Yes.
Okay, moment. I only give. Okay. Okay. In literature comparative studies, we can often meet with the statement that the Polish and Hebrew literatures on the Holocaust belong to two different orders of culture. The former is written by both Jews and non-Jews from the positions of the victims and bystanders, less frequently of assistants. The Hebrew literature, Holocaust literature, is written by Jews nearly always from the position of victims and from the outside perspective, far from the place of the Shoah Poland. In this paper, two novels will be analyzed, and the red left by Nava Semel and God's Horse by Wilhelm Dichter. The former was originally written in Hebrew, while the latter in Polish. They came from different linguistic backgrounds, and yet they belong to the same order of culture. Both have been written by Jewish authors affected by the trauma of the Shoah. Even though they belong to different generations, Wilhelm Dichter is a child of the Holocaust, while Nava Semel is a representative of the post-Holocaust second generation. Both of them speak from the position of victims, and in both cases, the main protagonist is a Jewish child. In 1996, at the age of 61, Dichter published his first novel on the Holocaust, Koń Pana Boga, God's Horse, which in Poland began a series of late debuts of the children of the Holocaust. When in 1986, Semel published her COHLIT, Head of Glass, a short story collection and the first work of fiction in Israel to address to the topic of the second generation. She was 31 years old. The novel Tzachok Shel Akbarosh and the Red Laughed was published in 2001. Thus, both novels discussed here, Dichter's and Semel's, open new chapters in the history of the Holocaust literature, also in different ways.
Excuse me, Sławomir, do you change the slides?
I changed.
So we can't see the changes. We see only the title.
Okay, I will do it. Okay, moment. And now? Can you see now?
It's the same.
What to do?
You can pick them from the left of your screen. Just move down. Show us from your screen, not from the full screen.
Okay. Okay, once again I try, okay?
Okay.
Moment. And now can you see?
We see slide number 2.
Okay, that's good. And if I show you the O, okay, moment. And now,
Now it's good.
See?
It's
Good.
slide number 2, but full screen.
Okay, and now?
Number 3.
Okay, wonderful. I'm so sorry. I'm working on Zoom the first time in presentation. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's happened to me, and I'm working. I work all the time with Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Chapter 1, memories, post-memories, sub-memories, non-memories. 7 several kinds of memory are activated in those novels. The memory of survivor, Dichter, the post-memory of the child of a survivor, and the unnatural sub-memory of the future reality, Semel, and the non-memory of new generations of readers in both. After an initial read of the novel, one may hypothesize that Holocaust is still traumatizing to all who carry these kinds of memories. But which memory is now the most universal? One can find an answer to this question in Semel's novel, in the attitude of one of the last eyewitnesses of the Shoah. Quotation, "Non-memory, that's what she ought to have talked about. The witnesses have passed away, their memories must be preserved. Also, the people who lost their memory are being envied by them. Holocaust survives, never lost it." Representatives of the second generations are deeply traumatized by those memory, so surprisingly, perhaps only those from the no memory population can really absorb the experience of the Shoah and feel real compassion for the victims. The old woman, the little girl who once was, from Semel's novel, remains a child forever. Inside her, time has become fossilized, and only on the outside, it has taken its toll. A child of the Holocaust may be able to share his or her tragic experience only to a no-memory child. A witness commits the experience to the Holocaust, a huge sub-memory folder, a vision of the future memory of the Shoah. On the other hand, all generations after the Holocaust, quotation, would be trapped in a never-ending loop of murder, hatred, and fear, with each generation starting the terrible cycle anew, having learned no lessons whatsoever. The little girl who once was decided to give testimony to her grandchild. She approached the danger zone, the limits of control, the place where she would no longer be able to hold on the storyline. In Dichter's book, the child of the Holocaust is a protagonist narrator. He is shown in the process of growing up. His experience of traumatized childhood opens another dimension. His memory was defended by the adults who allow him to remain a child. He therefore feels chosen. Part 2, a Polish hiding place. The protagonist of Semel's and the Rat Loved is a 5 to 6 year old Jewish girl who, upon the liquidation of the local ghetto, was entrusted by her parents to the care of a Polish family without an alternative. She was forced to spend many months alone in hiding places in extreme condition or in the company of complete strangers. The protagonist of God's Horse is a little older, an 8 to 9 year old boy who also spent his time in different hiding places in the city and in the countryside, but always in the company of his family and friends. He felt loved and cared for. The unnamed girl from Semel's book was hidden in a village in a potato pit. They lowered her into a pit under the ground. The stranger, the one whom she would come to call the farmer's wife, dragged her down the ladder and said, This is where you stay. Through this horrible experience, a girl who was too little to remember her own name forever reminded the little girl who once was in the pit that once was. She remembered only darkness and nothing more. Many years after the Holocaust, she was forever in a pit and never ever left it. The next hiding place for the girl was a niche in the apartment of a priest who agreed to take care of her after many months she had spent in the pit. When she was handed over to the priest, she looked and acted as if she was dead. She spent very long periods of time with eyelids shut tight. She hunkered in her niche like a clump of mud. At last, she ventured out of the niche and started walking gingerly through quarters, but she still cringed in the niche that she dug in the priest's quarter and covered her hair with dirt, lying quietly in her niche. The protagonist of the novel God's Horse also spent the time of the Holocaust in hiding places. The first of those was under the bed in the apartment of the former Polish housekeeper. But he was not alone. Quotation. During the day, Mother and Nusha sat in the corner and he lays under the bed. While at night, they, quotation, slept on the floor and the husband and wife slept in the bed. In the second hideout, he began to feel and to behave like an animal, as a little mouse under the bed. He dealt with psychological matters like a pet. In order to relieve himself under the bed, he turned onto his stomach and slid a chamber pot under him. During the day, he heard the sounds of birds outside the windows. Their voices didn't mean anything. He liked them. Why? Because he was indifferent to them. He was only afraid of the voices of the people who would come to get him. In his option, the biggest danger were the children, because they would recognize him instantly in the street and hand him over to the Germans. Grown-ups may take pity on him, but not children. After many weeks under the bed, he began to think, are there any Jewish children alive besides me? He would not want to be a single Jewish child in the world. I don't want to be alone. Finally, the mother and the child were thrown out from the hiding place by the Polish host. The next hideout was a little space in a garret and then in an attic. Inside those places, there was only a mattress covered with the blanket, and on it were red pillows with feathers sticking out of them. Next to it was a bucket covered with the board and a jug of drinking water with a dipper. The new hostess, Pani Sprysiowa, Mrs. Spryś, had been paid by the boy's grandfather to take care of them. She emptied the bucket, topped up the jug with water from the well, and brought them bread. In the next hideout, at the place of Pani Hirniakowa, Mrs. Hirniak, they were living inside a little space in the attic, in which beside a straw pallet, there was an empty iron bucket with a round wooden lid. The boy had to lie bent over under the rafter that supported the roof above the pallet. Pani Hirnikowa was a prostitute And at night, the boy heard the creaking of the bed, elbows and knees banged against the wall, laughing and growing. Sometimes pani Hirnikowa howled wildly, and the bed banged the floor faster and faster, terrified by the roars of the men. At those moments, the boy was looking in the direction of his mother, but he couldn't make her out in the darkness. He only remembered soldiers puffing out cigarette smoke. Some of them stayed until morning. The last hiding place was a well where the boy and his mother were taken by their cousins. They reached the destination after food lodging for several hours. One of their relatives lowered them and another grabbed their legs. Next, they found themselves in the arms of the boy's aunt Nusia, his mother's sister. They hugged and wept for a very long time. The mother and her son began the last stage of their hiding, an underground life, which was wet and smelled of moss. The boy began to perceive himself and his family as moles that huddled against each other. He thought of the death of his grandfather, who disappeared in the ghetto, and his father, who had committed suicide in their previous hideout after they left him alone and went to a new hiding place. They had left him because he was too ill to flee with his wife and son. But then the war was over, and so was the nightmare. The boy, his mother, and all the cousins come out to freedom. Part 3, a Jewish child. The boy in Dichter's novel survived not only as a Jewish child, but also as a human being. Also, he lost his father, grandparents, many members of his family, and of his friends. He saved himself, his wealth, and his Jewishness. It was possible thanks to his parents and cousins who were with him all the time. They did not leave or lose him. The protagonist of Semel's novel was not so lucky. A symbolic and a most suggestive description of the situation of a Jewish child can be found there in the form of exotic poems written many years after the Holocaust. Once upon a time, there was a little Jewish girl, and she had little Jewish hands and little Jewish eyes and a little Jewish mouth and a little Jewish body and a big hole. The nameless girl never said her name out loud in the muddle of the darkness. Similarly to many children of the Holocaust, she was not even allowed to pronounce it, because if she did, that would be end of her. While living in the potato pit, she perceived herself not as a human being, but as an animal, because only, she said, only the worst creatures in the world lived under the ground, moles and snakes and worms. And the worst of all were rats. She was worse than any of them, thought, if she had to be hidden away from all the people up above. In the darkness, which was her old ally, she did not think about the death of other people, but about her own death. Maybe, she said, she was really dead, because only dead people get pushed so deep down. She kept thinking that even God, whoever he may be, was ashamed of her. Otherwise, he wouldn't be hiding her in the dark. But what really took place in the pit? What was it that traumatized the girl so strongly? What did she hear and what did she feel? An old woman or the little girl who once was told her story in a children's language. The 5-year-old Jewish girl was regularly abused sexually or literally raped, but by an adult Polish male. Since this experience, the girl didn't want to become a grown-up ever. Adults were cruel, ruthless, and horrible. They lied, they did not keep promises, and they murdered each other. The girl believed that only animals were honest. One of them was a rat whom she met in the pit and who became her friend. And she did not feel that she was a human being. What do the exotic poems in the novel tell about those two small pets? A Jewish girl and her rat, 1, 2, that's that. 1 children, 1 rat. Guess what it found? 1 child in the ground. Part 4, adults. The first adults presented in both novels are the parents of the children. In Dichter's book, they accompany their son and hiked together through the Holocaust. Also, the boy's father committed suicide in a hopeless situation. He had earlier been taking care of his son and wife. The child's mother played a similar role. Dichter's young protagonist was surrounded by the love and care of his parents and other members of his Jewish family. But he also had a traumatizing experience when they had to change hideouts. But the adults accompanied him all the time, especially when they hid in the well. In the case of Samel's protagonist, the Jewish girl did not understand the decision of her parents. She was not sure if they loved her and only remembered this, quotation, "Mother said, be a good girl. Father said nothing." And they turned their back on her. After this event, the girl changed their attitude to God. Quotation, "If in fact he does exist, God is a mother who turns her back." The second group of adults are the Polish housekeepers, who had decided in both novels to hide the Jews for money. The protagonist of Samel's novel thought that the majority of them, quotation, hate Jews so much and did not know why they had agreed to provide hiding places. The Polish host, who was shown as a really monster, was Stefan. When Stefan was closed, she thought only about his tail located between his 2 legs. In the beginning, she understood it as the game that we play, the Stefan, the child. She asked herself why he was such an inhuman person. When did the sweet rosy-cheeked child turn into a predator? She made up a mythological story of a little Stefan who was the saint and as small as an elf. But the Stefan in the pit was not an elf from the myth. He thrashes, bashes, slashes. He was like the wild animal, and the little girl who once was during this time vomited in silence. He forced the child into the oral sex, raping and humiliated her repeatedly. In her perception, Stefan belonged to the Christian world. His prayer was Ave Maria, and she associated him with Christian God. To the 5-year-old girl, The nightmare seemed to the last forever. Quotation, the Stefan comes down, the Stefan goes up. Yesterday is what came before. Tomorrow is what comes next. Down comes the Stefan, up goes the Stefan. That's how time marches on. Her only desire was for Stefan to perish. This would have been the happiest day for her. When the peasant's family had decided to bring the Jewish girl out, they carried her to the priest. When she saw him, she thought that the clerk would be the next Christian rapist, the next Stefan. But Staś, the person in a Roman Catholic parish in a Polish village, the second Polish adult protagonist in Samuel's novel, was a good man. He preaches to his congregation to help and save Jews. When Staś became aware what had happened to the girl in the farmer's pit, he was intent to cure her trauma. The girl, when he saw her first, was very scared and sad. She could not laugh or smile because she did not know what those were. What does laughing mean? She asked the priest. She wanted to learn how to smile and said to Father Staś, "Teach me, please," and he did. But this therapy seemed to last forever. The situation of the little girl who once was very complicated. On the one hand, she was grateful to her teacher because she never laughed like this in her whole life. But on the other hand, when she tried to laugh, quotation, she could hear a strange sound coming out of her, as if a worried creature was laughing somewhere in the dark. She did not smile because she was staying forever in a pit. There was only one way out of this situation for the little girl who once was traumatized by the Holocaust. She had to break into the dream machine and begin a voyage toward non-memory. She also wanted to take Staś with her in the symbolic travel, which really first helped him understand her traumatic situation better. The little girl who once was said to the priest, "You are my future, Staś. Maybe this argument will convince you to let me go. Something is waiting at the end of this voyage." For many months, Staś was also traumatized by the story, which is why he also needed this dreaming therapy. The little girl who once was became an everlasting remembrance of Staś. Maybe the one and only rescue for him was an implantation, a false experience to his brain. At a certain point, Staś begins to identify himself with the rat from the potato pit. He becomes the rat. During the Holocaust, after long therapy in the niche, where Staś tried to accompany the little girl as long as he could, she began to gradually believe and trust him. At last, she said to him, "Promise me something. Swear to me that you will never, ever die." When after the war, a Jewish officer of the Soviet army took her away, she reacted in the same way as when her parents had given her to the farmer's family. "Staś, your bad Staś, the word Staś." In this moment, he understood what was happening. He was as a mother who had forsaken a nameless child. He was a bereaved father, and she was his daughter. "Daughter, this is your true name." Paradoxically, she loved him so much and suffered so many times during the Shoah that in the end, she forgot him. Regardless of that, the priest hoped that perhaps someday a miracle will happen and you will find the strength to remember me. One vibrant moment of razor blade memory. This is my only wish. I will rise out of the tohu and bohu within you. Before the end, forgive me, my daughter, bless me, for I have sinned. Part 5, animals. Before the Holocaust, the little girl was afraid of rats and over underground animals. What had been her nightmare became her friend in the hiding place. Paradoxically, from the post-war perspective, the rat was one and only good remembrance of the Jewish girl from the pit. She mentioned the rat many times during her stay at the priest's niche, and during this time her voice always became soft. After many years, she wrote in a poem, quotation, "I have a friend with a tail, and he has 4 legs. He gave him the name. His new nickname was Stash." A very important part of Semel's book is a legend about the rat created by God, but dissatisfied with the God had given him. He did not accept audacity and preferred the ability to laugh. The rat from the pit was a messenger from God, a kind of angel who wanted to be able to laugh. He didn't do it, but all the time he tried everything he could to make her laugh. Amazingly, his behavior showed that it was not a human being that was created in the divine image. It was the rat. In the darkness of the pit, the rat did not only meet the little Jewish girl, but also Stefan. He saw Stefan bite her, digging tunnels inside her. The rat compared himself with the young adult and concluded that it was definitely a human creature. The word of the Holocaust, it is implied between the lines, was God's worst mistake. To the little girl, the rat was the most wonderful creature and the happiest creature on the earth. When she scattered it in the darkness, the rat left. In this way, the rat became for the little girl the only real human being in the world of the Holocaust, because only he loved her so much. By contrast, Stefan became the rat, the girl's nightmare. The Stefan also has a tail. It's between his 2 legs. His mouth called her the war. In the girl's new hiding place, Father Stash, a Polish Roman Catholic priest, took the role of the rat. The girl once told him that she never ever left the pit, only the rat did. The man wanted to cheer her up when she was barely alive in her niche, so he hoped, sniffed, moved his whiskers, stood up his ears, beat his hairless tail against the walls. In the end, he concluded, "I am her human rat." The girl liked it very much. She pulled at her rat and said, "Stash, you're the best rat in the world." He also wanted the girl to keep smiling. "I will stretch out my red tail and I will laugh to you." The Red Messiah and God's horse conclusion. One day, when Father Stash came back after teaching from the school, he found the girl squatting in the niche, drawing on the walls with her piece of charcoal. When he tried to peek inside, she hid the picture with her body. He then discovered that it was a charcoal drawing of the Last Judgment on the wall. The little Jewish girl had painted it in complete darkness. The priest could see in this drawing her own imagination of the Last Judgment Day. It was also an interpretation of her own story, which Staś quickly understood. In the girl's artistic imagination, quotation, the hand of God reaches under the altar, typing the scales in full view of the Archangel Gabriel. Above them is the Holy Mother on her throne, holding a rod in her lap. The same motif recurs in the fantastic vision of the future of the next generation. Quotation, I activated the location search engine. The implant chip probes put me in Eastern Europe, and the database crossed me with the ruins of a forgotten church that was uncovered only recently. This was the Madonna of the Red Church, and inside there was a strange iconography of the Last Judgment Day, drawn with something solid, possibly a piece of charcoal. In the center was the Madonna cradling a gaping moated rat. Next to her, the earth had opened wide, and a long procession of people was emerging, led by a little girl, her face blurred. As the priest describes in his memory, 25th December 1944, Christmas Day, the Madonna painted by the girl was a Jewish woman with Star of David around her neck, which the priest added using a twig that had been covered over with dirt. The rat was not laughing out or joy or derision. The rat's mouth was gaping at the horror of that which would be and which had been. It is the laughter of those who accompany the dead as they stared into the pit. In this picture, in the niche, the old story of the Jewish girl was encoded. A Jewish woman, a Jewish girl, people, the rat, and the pit of the Holocaust. But the rat was situated where in traditional iconography one finds Christ. This imaginary vision of the Last Judgment Day is more horrible than the traditional one. Also, the people around are rolling with laughter. This is not a laughter of rejoicing, but a nervous laughter of horror. Was it a disgrace, a desecration? How did the Jewish girl know Christian iconography? When Staś realized how bare were the walls in the room, he removed the icons from the dusty shelves in the sacristy and scattered them in the corners. The painted Christian saints were the only humans that the girl saw for many months. From time to time, she steals a glance at the icons, but leans tightly against the wall of her niche so as to leave it free. Conclusion. The rat of the Holocaust from Semel's novel is a messianic figure. The end of the world from Christian mythology is nothing compared to the horror of the Holocaust. In this vision, people were a disappointment. The Stefan, an adult human being, became a horrible monster like a wild rat from the girl's pre-Holocaust nightmares. After the Holocaust, the rat and generally animals replaced humans. That is why Staś realized that if he wanted to maintain his humanity, the girl had to see a rat in him. The rat replaced Christ, and as an animal, in the only savior after the experience of the Shoah. In Dichter's novel, the name God's horse was given to the main protagonist, a Jewish child who survived the Holocaust, living through its horror. His situation after the Shah changed. He belonged to those who remind of the Polish Jewry. The communist period is the post-war Poland gave him a chance for a normal life. In these two books, the animals take symbolic meanings. The Holocaust violated the traditional structure of reality and culture. A child stopped being a child. An adult stopped being an adult. And an animal was no longer an animal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sławomir. Thank you, Naama, once more. And before we'll continue with the question part of this session, there is a change in our program. We'll continue with 30 minutes, half an hour of questions, of discussion, and then without a break, we'll move to the last part of the final remarks, and we'll end this webinar. So I'm looking for your questions for Naama and Sławomir. I know that and the rat left is hard text, but nobody wants to ask anything. Sławomir, do you have a question?
I have a question to Naama. Believe me that a reading of this book was, of course, a horror experience, but it was also a very interesting experience for the scholar who is interested in the recent Holocaust literature. I was so sorry that I couldn't read it in Hebrew, but I hope the future is above me. And I would like to ask you about the structure. I'm very interested in your point of view on the structure of this novel. You told a little bit about it, but my experience after reading is that there are 5 parts of this book, but when I read it, I thought that no part can exist without the other part. For instance, when I read these esoteric poems, I could understood nothing without the memoir of priest, without the first parts of narrative on the hiding place in the potato pit, etc. I read so many books on this topic, but really this book is fantastic, really fantastic. And I am very interested in your point of view of it. Do you share it or no, please?
Well, first of all, yes, I share it. I had to read it a few times. I guess some of you also felt the need to read it more than once to understand what's going on in the story. I think Nava Semel weaved a very, very complex novel. It was very smart of her to use different genres and to express this unexpressed story in different ways. And as I said before, I think she deliberately used the different genre systems to make us be baffled and to be in a stage of not understanding. She didn't want to give us the entire coherent story, okay? She wanted us, the readers, to feel what the granddaughter felt, what other people felt, that they are not getting the story. And she did it in a very, very interesting and smart way. That is what I think about the structure of the story.
And could you tell me how long did she work on this novel?
I really don't know. I really don't know. I have to say that I also met her. Erga, you started by saying that you knew her. I also met her once when I was a teacher at Siegel College in Cleveland for 2 years, and she was there for a lecture. And I spoke with her. She was a very warm person, really amazing. And I have to say that she was very happy to hear that academical work is being done on her story. I had a few ideas and I spoke with her and she told me, send everything to me. I want to know. Like she felt that the readers are giving another layer to the story. And she's finding out things in the story she didn't even mean to consciously, and suddenly, well, we know that stories and songs comes to life with the readers. Yeah.
And what was the reaction of critics after publishing this book in 2001?
Again, I'm not sure. I mean, I read a few things that were written about this book. I don't know about the general feeling. I can tell you that I read the book once it came out, and it was something new. It was something that was never written before. Yeah, and this is also, I think, why it was not really widespread among the readers, because it's so hard. It's a hard book.
Last year, this book was translated into Polish. I found it on the internet and I bought it. But I was looking for the reactions of Polish audience for this book, and I found only one review of this book. And it is amazing. Of course, I before our seminar didn't know this book, but now I want to write about it on the Polish literature magazines.
Well, you know that maybe it's got to do with there was a big thing with the Polish government about how we treat the Polish people, the Shoah. It's a very complicated issue, so maybe it's got something to do with that.
Thank you so much.
As I know, she wrote And the Red Left for 2 years, but actually it took her more time because she started and then she wrote for another project and returned to the text. Intensive work was about 2 years, but I think that the idea of writing it started when she wrote the Flying Away. The first time she wrote The Flying Away, and she wrote a play on the Holocaust at the same time when she worked on And the Red Left. The play, the opera play, it's not she worked with Ella Milch Sharif, who is also a second generation. She is a musician, and they work
and
together.
It became an opera.
Yeah. It's not exactly an opera, and you can all listen to it. It's open, it's free, and you can listen to it in YouTube. But I think And the Red Laugh is unique form, and that I wanted to ask our Israeli fellows here. I think it's unique within her work. It's something she never do again. She never did again. I think it's one-time work. What do you think?
I want to answer that, Erga. I think that the ideas in the book, she had them in other books. In Heart of Glass, many of the things that I said are in there. the ideas about emotional memory and second and third generation to the Holocaust. But
of course, she's the same person, but the
yes,
conjunction of the parts.
So I think it's a unique piece. You can't do it again. That's why.
Michal?
I think it's not the same to the same extension, but I mentioned before Grossman's novel, which is kind of a magnum opus in a way. The work is a genre. It's not as, like there is no poetry there, but you also question the how can we express that which is inexpressible by using different, like he ends the piece with the encyclopedia. And he starts with a narrative and then he deconstructs it, and it's all there in the end of the 80s. But of course, what Semel does is different. It's more extreme and more radical, and in that sense, much more experimental, I would say. But it also incorporates like avant-garde and things that we can find in modernist literature at the beginning of the 20th century. So it has all kinds of levels, I assume. And I wanted to ask about Naama, so thank you very much, first of all, for your beautiful lecture. You used Kristeva, and I was wondering whether, because you also, you told us that you met Semel and you probably wrote things that you read things that she wrote. To what extent did she know these theories? And I was also thinking about the semiotic in the sense of gender relationship, that usually we connect the semiotic with the feminine, the symbolic with the male, or the, and you can put inside also irregare and siksu and the body and all this stuff. So in what sense do you think it has to do with Semel as women writer?
Well, first of all, I think gender is very present in this book. I mean, we have 3 generations of women. The memory moved from one woman to another, so it's very clear that that the gender is important. Elsewhere, Nava Semel wrote that the memory can be transferred through the milk, through the mother's milk. So there's something about the body, the fact that the mother is carrying the children, the physical sensory dimension we talked about, that may be turning the women to be the carriers of this memory. As to what Semel knew about it, I really don't know. I haven't got the chance to speak to her about that. This is something new that I wrote only now. So I don't know if she really thought about it in those theoretical terms, but it was something very intuitive to her.
Okay. And thank you. And one question to Sławomir also, thank you very much for your wonderful lecture. I was thinking about 2 traditions. One is the metamorphosis, when you spoke about animal and how would you say, the human and the animal. So the metamorphosis, and also the romanticist tradition. What happens there, and could you see a kind of transformation from romanticism to modernism and postmodernism, if we would like to? You mentioned the Christianity and this kind of theological perspective, but can you say also something about?
First of all, when I read this book, I think about the realization of the imagination of Jewish and Christian people who used the figures of animals for say something very important thing. It is, of course, many examples from the Bible, but from the Christian order of scripture, we can pay attention on the realization of the figure of Christ. It was used the code, what is in English? Code, yes. And what is interesting that it is not far from the thinking about Christ. And for me, it was interesting. But I think the revolution is on this side that in this book, we could see the new perspective that the people began to live like an animals, and the animals began to live like human beings. And I think that this is, of course, one side of great revolution in thinking about animals and thinking about people after Holocaust. In Poland, there are a few examples of literature studies books about the animals in the context of Shoah. And it is very interesting to see this researching on it. And for me, it was really very interesting because in the figure of Madonna and rat, it meets two orders, because the rat is usually connected with the order of the hell. The rats are from hell, and these animals there is on the lap of Madonna, and it is so very interesting, and it changed the matter of thinking about the literature, the history of literature, culture, and history and culture. And we must remember that in Christian mythology, also Christ went down to the hell before his resurrection. And he went down to this area when the rats lived. And for me, it was really shocked when I began to discover this connection. That I think that first of all, it was very important for me that Semel knew very well Christian mythology and Christian order of culture. It was amazing, wonderful. Okay, thank you.
Do we have another questions? So maybe we'll have a break after, or Roman, what do you say?
I suggest that we go ahead and just close this session. You are invited to close the session and then close up the conference, and then we'll proceed to the final part of our meeting. Okay, to the plans for our next meeting.
Okay, so I want to thank Naama and Sławomir for the very interesting talks, and I'm not concluding yet our webinar, so maybe we'll have 5 minutes of break because people are sitting for long hours. 5 minutes?
Yes.
Roman?
Yes, thank you so much. And I know that now Chris is calling to our colleague from Berlin, and they try to find the place and term of our next seminar in Berlin, and that's why we should wait for him.
Okay, so we'll meet as planned at that what you are suggesting, to meet as planned in 15 minutes from now. So let's all have a break, take your coffee, something to eat, refresh, and we'll meet again in 15 minutes from now. Thank you very much. Thank you,
you.
Naama.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I just wanted. Okay, I don't think there is no need. Thank you, Oron.
Recording.
Oron, thank you. You can switch off the